Chapter 20. Resistance, Temporary Headquarters. John tossed himself onto the cot. It creaked and waggled alarmingly, despite the fact that he'd never weighed more than 150 in his life, and was a nickel short of that right now. That there was a cot made it luxury accommodation, and he didn't want to get the reputation of trashing the presidential suite. He turned up the Coleman lantern on the tray beside him and dug the letter out of his breast pocket, ignoring the flickering light and the fruity smell of the burning alcohol. Getting a personal letter from an old friend was something of an event for him. He occasionally received notes from his mother or from Dieter, but mostly it was impersonal emails or reports. This had come from Jack Brock in Missouri. John Connor had asked Jack to keep him informed about his father, Kyle Reese. Of course, Jack has no idea of the relationship. No doubt he thought that John was just doing the good commander thing. He tore open the envelope and began to read. Dear John, hope you don't mind me being so familiar, but I can't seem to help myself when I'm just writing a letter and not an official document. If you'll recall, you asked me to keep you informed about Kyle Reese and his little friend Jesse, which I will. But what you may not know is that we've got ourselves quite a crop of orphans now, and I thought I'd start by telling you something about the kids in general. First off, there's not a lot of laughter in them. Not that they've got a lot to laugh about. But, you know, you like to say that kids are resilient. That they can get over anything given time. I guess maybe part of the problem is we can't give them that time, or Skynet won't. Anyway, they're a grim little bunch. I got to thinking that maybe we were at least partially to blame. First thing we always do when we get a new kid is to start training him. I know we have to, and mostly they take to it very well, but we found that we've kind of been treating them like short adults, if you know what I mean. So, I've assigned Susie and some of her friends to show them some fun. I wish you could have seen my girl's face when I gave her that order. It was like, Dad, you've given me some weird assignments in my time, but this one beats them all. But she's doing a first-rate job, and seems to be enjoying herself as well. The kids have begun to smile, which Susie and her friends are cracking up all over the place about. My great fear now is that they'll start playing practical jokes. As you'll recall, that used to be one of Susie's specialities. On the other hand, maybe that's just what these kids need. Proof that even when they're naughty, they won't be lined up against a wall and shot. There's been too many incidents like that in their lives already. When I think about what they've been through, I have to admit, it humbles me, and it makes me grateful for the life I've led so far. It still seems to me that childhood is the longest part of life. How will this affect them when they're adults and they have these memories to look back on? I can only hope we'll win this thing before they're adults. My God, John, think about it. Having to teach kids how to have fun. John dropped the letter onto his chest and pinched the bridge of his nose. The scar that the cyber seal had left there all those years ago was hurting again, but then it did that when he was very tired. He sighed. His own upbringing had been unusually tough by the standards of the day, but he'd known how to laugh and having fun had been no problem, even if he did resort to stealing to ensure maximum joy. Compared to today's kids, he'd had it cushy. As to Kyle, I really like him. He's not a leader. I don't see him ever becoming an officer, but he's solid, and he'll make a hell of a sergeant one day. He has an impulse to protect that I like to see, and he accepts responsibility. He's smart, if no scholar, and he's honorable. If he agrees to do something, he'll do it, by God. Yeah, John thought uncomfortably. He will. This was eerily like his mother's descriptions, but then Kyle Reese was growing towards that moment they met. My head hurts. He turned back to the letter. His little friend Jesse turns out to be a boy after all. Small as he is and dressed in that grey clothing, you couldn't tell. He and Kyle watch each other's backs, which is good to see. Not that we have much in the way of kids mixing it up. Like I said, they hardly know how to misbehave. It's good that they have each other. Like the rest of the kids, they don't make new friends easily, and none of them have formed very close ties with the adults around them. They'd better get over it, or Skynet may just have succeeded, if indirectly, in eliminating the human race. And on that sour note, I'll close. All our best to you, John. John folded the letter and put it on the tray table. Kyle was a healthy young boy with a wounded psyche, but a good heart. In other words, he was already much like the man who became his father. He wished he could do something to make it easier for him, but he didn't dare. Jack and Susie will be good to him, John thought. They'll take care of him and train him well. Jack had certainly done a fine job with Susie. John wondered if Kyle and his mother had laughed. Don't go there. No, no, no. Think about a pink giraffe, hippopotamus, jelly beans, anything. Then he forced his mind back to the last intelligence report he'd read. Finally, he managed to distract himself enough that he thought he could sleep. Though when he closed his eyes, just before he drifted off into exhausted slumber, his mind flashed him a picture of Kyle's tear-stained face, and he sighed. John, I don't know what you expect me to do, Sarah said. We can't impose something like this from on high. For one thing, not everyone has the leisure, let alone the resources, to set up schools. John Connor stretched out and sighed, looking up at the fleecy skies. The Pacific Northwest was putting on one of its rare, beautiful summer days. He wriggled his shoulders into the fragrant pine duff and went on. Mom, we've got to do something. I don't expect a regular school with strict hours of operation or anything like that. But if we don't require some effort, then these orphans are going to be at a terrific disadvantage. John hated to use time on one of his rare visits with his mother and Dieter to argue, but this was something they had to do. The longer they waited, the further behind they got. She threw up her hands. So what do you think I can do? I think we could work out some kind of guidelines, Dieter suggested. I agree with you that everyone's circumstances are different, and so anything formal is out of the question. However, as John points out, this is something that has to be done. Perhaps no one is working on this because they don't know how to begin. Sarah smiled briefly and touched the Austrian's arm. John hid his own smile by taking a sip of coffee. He liked the way Dieter acted as a peacemaker between him and his mom. It made him feel part of something human scale and quite precious. In the rest of his life, he was pretty isolated by virtue of his function. He had a lot of fans, but few friends. It occurred to him that before Dieter came along, he and his mother rarely indulged in the kind of flare-ups that demanded a peacemaker. One of life's little luxuries, John thought. Aloud, he said, So I guess that's what I'm asking you to do, Mom. Find a way for them to start. Sarah nodded, her eyes already taking on the faraway look of planning. Dieter gave John a conspiratorial smile. God, but I love these people. Quebec wilderness. "John, my man, welcome, welcome." Snog was all smiles as he came forward, arms open wide for a French-style embrace. He grabbed John and kissed him resoundingly on both cheeks, greatly displeasing Connor's security people, a fact that visibly amused John. "My house is your house. Let me introduce you to my wives." John allowed himself to be led into the above-ground entrance to the Resistance's technological arm, which gave a convincing imitation of a hunting lodge, half-ruined and wholly abandoned amid the endless rolling hills, blue-green with fir and starred with sapphire lakes. Certainly a change from the rat warrens we spend most of our time in, he thought. Most of it had been built with Dieter's money back before Judgment Day, which indeed did make it John's house. Since the war had begun, the place had been expanded, as had the staff, and without them the Resistance would long since have fallen apart. If Skynet so much as suspected their existence, it would stop at nothing to destroy them. At the moment, though, the greatest threat to this colony of technologists and scientists was their leader's increasingly wacky lifestyle. Snog had insisted on labeling himself a techno-shaman, and he was putting the moves on everyone, except, so far, the children. There had been numerous complaints from many different sources that those who refused his advances ended up working in the production facility indefinitely. Although the rules stated that the personnel would rotate that necessary duty so that no one was deprived of the opportunity for research. Snog himself was odd-looking. For one thing, he was overweight in a world where literally everyone else was slim to skinny. For another, there were diodes and transistors and other bits of technical paraphernalia braided into his waist-length hair, and he was wearing a scarlet muumuu with huge bell sleeves. And he didn't smell too good either. John had begged his mother to make this visit for him, but she'd refused. "Whatever influence I ever had over that bloated geek is gone," she'd insisted. John had been taken aback. Sarah didn't tend to toss around epithets like bloated geek. "The last time I visited him, he put his hand on my thigh," Sarah said. "What does that tell you?" That he has a death wish? John thought. That he has a version of the Oedipus complex. That he has a death wish and an Oedipus complex. But he'd conceded that if Snog was treating Sarah Connor like this, then extreme methods might be necessary, and he'd have to actually go to Quebec to determine what those might be. I might have to whack him around a little. Which he really didn't want to have to do. Now, though, actually looking at the man. I wonder if Snog's ass is even connected to his brain anymore. "My wives," Snog said, with a grand wave of his arm towards a collection of women who were as equally weird in their appearances as himself. In addition to the long hair twined with little bits of stuff, their faces were half painted, either horizontally or vertically, in black and vermilion, and each of them looked bug-eyed from drugs or from some form of shock. 30 sullen-looking children were mixed among them, every one of them Snog's. "Maybe later," John said crisply. "Right now I need to discuss some business with you, and I'm afraid it won't wait." Snog stiffened, and his face took on a stoically offended look, but he waved a gracious arm, and with an actual bow, the women retreated. Without another word or backward look, Snog led him to a very large and comfortable office suite. The techno-shaman went around a massive desk and sat down. He flicked a hand towards a small chair in front of the desk. John remained standing. He looked his old friend over and came to a decision. "Okay, here's the deal," Connor said. "I need a technical advisor with me in the field, and that will be you." Snog's jaw dropped. "Don't even bother to protest," John said. "The decision is made." My wives," Snog said. "My children." "Your wives will continue their work in your absence. I assume they do actually work." Rumor had it that they only worked when and on what they wanted to, and some of their projects had no conceivable use to the resistance. Yeah, sure they do," Snog said. "And, of course, they'll take good care of the children." He placed his knuckles on the gleaming desktop and leaned forward. "Believe me, buddy, I wouldn't ask for a sacrifice like this if it wasn't necessary." "And it is necessary because if I leave you here, I'm going to have you shot." There must be at least one psychiatrist in the resistance who would like to get his or her hands on a raging case of megalomania like this one. Who would have thought that one of my oldest friends would turn out to have more in common with Skynet than with the rest of the human race? "You'll have to change into something less eye-catching," John said, indicating Snog's scarlet draperies. I honestly don't know if we've got anything that will fit," Snog stammered. "Find something," John advised. "We'll be leaving in 36 hours at the latest." "God, man!" Snog looked around his office, his hands wandering as though he didn't know what to do with them. "Well, this is such a shock." Connor shrugged. "Sorry, man, but it's necessary." He looked down for a moment. "Do you have an assistant or something? I know you'll want to spend as much time as you can with your family before you go, so maybe we should have someone else brief me on what you're doing." Sure, Snog said dazedly. He tapped an intercom. "Shed Cho, report to the main office." "Listen, you don't have to stay," John said. "You've got to break this to your wives and kids. I can introduce myself." Yeah, thanks, man." Snog rose and moved around the desk, gave John an amazed look, and left. Muttering furious curses, John went around the desk and sat down. One or two tries at the computer proved it to be beyond his ability to break into. He sat and waited. If he had to go through this complex one person at a time, he would find someone capable of running it. Cho tapped the door twice and entered. At first sight, John suspected that this was the first sane person he'd seen here today. A few quick questions confirmed this fact, as did the man's superior personal hygiene. It turned out that Cho had been running the complex for the last 4 months, with intermittent interference from Snog. "I think that he was just overworked and kind of cracked up. Nobody noticed, so he kept on working and getting crazier and crazier." Cho put a hand on his chest. "Now, I'm no shrink, but getting him away from here is probably going to do him a world of good. And it'll sure make life easier for the rest of us. That techno-shaman stuff probably did wonders for inspiring the resistance." "Yeah, it did," John said. "Having a good wizard helped a lot. It's why Snog isn't being marched off in handcuffs right now." Cho squirmed a little, embarrassed. "Don't get me wrong. Snog's still brilliant when his head is straight. He taught me all I know, and no false modesty, but I know a lot. It's just that he started believing the propaganda," John said, nodding. "Now, tell me about the chameleon fabric." John had assigned 2 of his people to look around the complex and report back to him. Within 24 hours, he'd organized a complete change of personnel and hoped he'd rooted out the Wifties. 12 hours before they were scheduled to leave, John confronted the shaman, still in his scarlet regalia. How's the new wardrobe coming? Snog shrugged cheerfully. Oh, my ladies are looking around, but so far, no luck. I tell you what, Snog, tell them to look harder, because you're not wearing that thing when you come with me. I imagine you'd get kind of cold running around naked. He turned to go, then said over his shoulder, Oh, and lose the hair. The next morning, Snog showed up shorn and wearing blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and a hangdog expression. His many wives and children sniffled and sobbed and waved sad goodbyes as they drove off in a convoy of vehicles with dazzle stealth coverings. Geez, John thought. No wonder he cracked. For the first 2 weeks, the self-proclaimed techno-shaman was left to his own devices, which meant enjoying the tiny library and chatting with off-duty personnel. He was shielded from the incoherent messages he was receiving from his extended family, which Cho said were the result of all his wives coming down from some pretty heavy, home-brewed drugs. It was clear that some of these women were never going to be, and perhaps never had been, normal. Not that that was so very unusual these days. But some of them are slowly coming down to Mother Earth, Cho said over the satellite link. Whether they'll still want to be part of a harem once they've sobered up remains to be seen. How is Gandalf the Geek? Getting cold and sober and doing well on the lower fat diet common to the rest of humanity, John said. In fact, he's already a lot more like the Snog I knew of old. After a while, Connor assigned his old friend the task of teaching science to the orphans under the supervision of Snog's own personal psychologist. He finally allowed Snog unlimited email access to the saner members of his family, but he'd already informed Cho that he wasn't to take any orders from him unless they made sense. Things were already going more smoothly in Quebec, and John breathed a sigh of relief. Now he could get on to simpler issues, like fighting the war. Missouri, 7 years later. Okay, folks, those are our goals for this patrol. It's all pretty routine, but... The whole group recited together. There's no such thing as routine! Jesse grinned at Kyle, excited to be going out on this first mission. Kyle was excited, but it was more of a nausea-inducing kind of excitement, and he wished that Jesse wasn't coming on this routine mission. His friend had gotten orders to report to Quebec, where he would receive advanced technological training, and he would be safe. Kyle envied him. There were very few places in this world that might be called safe, but the Quebec facility was one of them. Wouldn't mind being assigned there myself, he thought, though the winters might be nasty. But his mind didn't have that special spark. He could use technology, and he was an excellent shot, but Jesse had something else, something special. Still, everyone had to do certain things. Going out like this was one of them, kind of a rite of passage. Their teachers claimed that it put everyone on the same footing, and in case of emergency gave everyone an idea of how to act. He suspected that Jesse was too young for patrol. You were supposed to be a minimum of 17, but nobody knew his friend's age, not even Jesse. So when he claimed to be as old as Kyle, who could argue? Okay, check your gear one last time, and we'll move out. The boys checked each other, although they knew there was no need. Jesse worked in electronics repair, and Kyle in supplies. They'd chosen what they knew was the best gear for themselves, with the practical self-centeredness of teenagers. Kyle tried to return Jesse's grin, but he was too nervous. They lined up with the other soldiers and headed for the outside. 48 hours later, Jesse was no longer smiling. Kyle was having daydreams about hot soup. He shook them off and pulled up the hood of his camouflage cloak. It dulled his hearing a bit, but he couldn't hear anything except the sudden hiss of the rain and the patter of drops falling from the trees above anyway. He couldn't see much past 10 yards either, unless he jacked the sensitivity of his goggles way up. "And I'd have thought that being this wet would make you clean," he thought, shifting his plasma rifle from one arm to the other beneath the dank weight of the cloak. "Nope, smell like wet dog. Very wet, very unbathed dog." It had rained for the whole time they'd been out on patrol. Otherwise, it really had been routine. Nothing had happened. Nothing had been seen. Frankly, nothing could be seen through the damn rain and fog. And it had been cold. Not freezing, just cold. The squad was on its way back, and the two friends were trying not to shiver too obviously. They'd already been smiled at by their more experienced companions far too much. Kyle and Jesse were in the middle of the column, if you could call the staggered formation a column. Kyle was keeping his eyes on the narrow path before him, too stunned by cold even to care that he was walking on the edge of a precipice. There was a sound behind him, like gravel going down a chute, and he marched on for several paces before the sound even registered. He turned, and behind him, the path was gone. There was a huge gap between him and the next soldier 20 feet away. His eyes went from the gap to the soldier, and then back again. And then realization hit him like a rush of heat. "Jesse!" he said, and started forward. A heavy hand bit into his shoulder, and he turned to fight it off, only to find himself on the ground, struggling to breathe, under the full weight of the adult man who'd stopped him. "Let me go!" Kyle insisted. "Easy, kid," the man said. "Take it easy. Nothing you can do." He kept repeating it over and over until Kyle stopped struggling and began to weep. Hard, painful sobs that ripped from his soul. The man went onto one knee and held him, saying nothing, occasionally patting Kyle's shoulder. Then, after a minute or two, he urged him to his feet. "We've got to go," the soldier said. "We've got to keep moving, okay?" Kyle nodded. He felt sick and he thought that nothing was okay. But he wasn't going to slow down the squad and maybe get someone killed. Jesse was gone. The soldier gently pushed Kyle to go ahead of him, and Kyle went, walking like a zombie. How could this have happened? Kyle asked himself. His best friend just gone, in a stupid, meaningless accident that could have happened to anyone. It might have been him if he'd been walking just a bit slower, or even both of them. Stupid, he thought. Jesse was gone. The resistance would be poorer for his loss. We could afford to lose me much more easily, Kyle thought. Jesse's gifts weren't something he could replace, no matter how hard he studied. Kyle looked around. But then, Jesse would never have been as good out here as I can be. He resolved at that moment never to be less than the best he could be. In your honor, he pledged. I swear, Jesse, I'll make my life mean something. But not here. He couldn't stay here, where he'd lost so much. He had to ask Jack to send him far away from all the pain and all the memories. Los Angeles, 2 years later. Sergeant Kyle Reese armed the plasma satchel. It looked like a cylinder of smooth metal, and he didn't know exactly how it worked. More from the wizards of Quebec, but it did work. He nodded to Samantha. She armed hers too. They were in what had once been downtown Burbank, and the HKs were out in force tonight. A big Grollo unit was crunching its way towards them through the cindered ash and twisted steel and skeletons. Reese snarled, tasting the ash on his lips, the ash of 12 million dead. He rose and threw. The satchel landed exactly under the Grollo's left thread, and then he ducked back down. Samantha wasn't quite fast enough. One of the heavy plasma rifles bore on her as she threw, and he turned his head aside, closing his eyes for a single instant. Got to get out, he thought. Got to get to the car, think about it later. John stood looking down at the young soldier. He'd been badly banged up in the crash and burned too. Nothing fatal, but nothing very easy to endure either. Medical facilities were still pretty basic at the outlying stations. He's so unbelievably young, John thought. Kyle Reese's time hadn't yet come. He wished that he could get to know this young man, but he didn't dare. Hell, I don't dare touch him. For all he knew, touching his father might set off some kind of explosion or cause them both to melt or something. In his hands, John held a picture of his mother. She'd been in Mexico when it was taken, she'd told him, pregnant with him. And she'd been thinking of his father at the time and trying to decide what to do about Skynet and how to do it. John sighed. They'd had so little time together. Like a lot of things about Kyle Reese's life, it was unfair. The young soldier in the bed stirred and opened his eyes. For a moment they stayed blank. Burning, he whispered. Got to get out. The fuel's gonna go. It's all right, Connor said. You've been retrieved. You're back in the infirmary. It took a moment for Kyle to recognize John Connor, but when realization hit, he struggled to sit up. No, John said, raising a hand to stop him. Don't you dare salute me. Just lie back down and heal. We need you. Thank you, sir, Reese said, his words slightly slurred. I'm not just talking about ragtime here, soldier, John assured him. Boy, am I ever not just blowing smoke, he thought. My mission didn't quite go as planned, sir, Kyle protested. They seldom do once the firing starts, John assured him. You've rid the world of your share of HKs, and your commander tells me you're a good sergeant. It's my humble opinion that without good sergeants, we'd be up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. Sometimes we do lose a little, but we win more than we lose. And ultimately, we're going to win this war and take this world back from the machines. And it's men like you who are going to do that. So you rest and you heal, and you get back in there. Kyle swallowed and nodded once. Yes, sir. John's lips jerked in an attempted smile. Then he laid the picture on his father's stomach. My mother, he said in explanation, and watched the young man's eyes go wide. Sarah Connor, the legend, he thought wryly. Christ, I'm setting my dad up with my mom. Kyle picked up the picture and was caught. Sarah Connor was young in the photo. She looked soft and feminine and terribly sad. More than once, he'd felt as sad and alone as her expression showed she was feeling. He felt a kinship with the woman in the picture, as though she was someone he could talk to. Reluctantly, he lifted his hand to give the picture back, but Connor was gone. Puzzled, Reese looked around, but the commander was definitely nowhere around. Still, he wasn't sorry that he didn't have to give the picture back. He looked at the young woman's face, studying every line, every angle. A sense of longing overcame him, a desire to know her. Kyle closed his eyes and fell asleep and dreamed of Sarah Connor. Resistance Command Center, 4 years later. "John, my man, wait till you see what I've got for you," Snog said. He was imitating the happy talk excitement of a Ginshu knife salesman. John smiled wearily. His somewhat rough and ready treatment of his old friend had certainly smoothed out some of the wrinkles, but Snog is always going to be a goof. God, he makes me feel younger and older at the same time. At least he wasn't completely crazy anymore, just productively weird. And he even fit in here at Regional HQ, which was as normal an environment as the world had to offer. Rock and concrete, yes, but at least they weren't living on gruel and fighting infiltrator units all the time. "So, what have you got for me?" Connor asked. "I have the treasure of the Sierra Madre, King Solomon's lost mines, Atlantis, the missing link. You name it, man. We have discovered, here in the wilds of darkest Canada, the salvation of the human race. Hallelujah, brother! Can I get an amen?" In the background, shouts of amen could be heard from the offices down the rock-hewn corridor. With a build-up like that, Snog, this better be good. "Oh, it's better than good," his old friend assured him. "Check this out." He clicked a few keys, and his smiling face was replaced by a picture of what looked like aircraft. John leaned forward. It was aircraft, B-2s if he wasn't mistaken. And they're in perfect condition. "Fuel," was his first question. "Tons," Snog said. "Literally, but that's not all. Looky here." The B-2s were replaced by what John at first thought were planes, but were actually drones. Bomb-carrying, radar-evading, far-seeing drones. "My God," Connor whispered. "It's the mother lode." "You bet your ass it is," Snog crowed. "Look out, Skynet, 'cause here we come." John felt himself smiling. "And we can take 'em?" "Now that the defense grid is smashed, yeah," Snog said. "Take 'em and fly 'em." "And Skynet isn't that distributed," John said. "With this, we can root out the central units.